spiritual healing.
Recording is on.
All right, cool. Ed, when you're ready, you can take us away.
Cool, sweet. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so I guess for those of you who are not aware, I've been spending the last 3-4 months working on or researching sort of UTXO management and coin selection within Bitcoin applications. I started off by writing a page for the Bitcoin design guide. We thought it was maybe going to go in the payment section, and then reworking a few things, we figured that maybe it's actually not the best to have it in the design guide, and so instead we've been working towards, or I've been working towards, fleshing out a fairly sort of, I would say, beginner to intermediate level presentation, and then also working on some interactive web tools to help designers and also developers get a decent understanding of what UTXOs are and how they work within Bitcoin wallets and applications, and then specifically sort of coin selection or coin control during Bitcoin payments, with a few sort of intended goals, which we'll go through. So I'll start off by just running through the presentation that I've been working on. So yeah, again, as I sort of said, this is for anywhere for sort of intermediary to sort of beginner level. I mean, obviously, we'd like to have advanced people in there as well, but the idea is to hopefully host some workshops where we can use this presentation as a way of highlighting a problem, specifically around sort of like privacy and payments, but just getting people to understand the problem and then finishing it with kind of a call to action of open design of how we can come up with certain solutions to solve these problems of like bad UTXO management or coin selection. So I'll just run through the presentation. And first of all, thanks to Christoph for basically providing like the design template. This is what they'll be using for the config presentation. So again, working with open design. So yeah, first of all, just a run through of basically like looking at an introduction to UTXOs and coin control or coin selection, taking them through an intro to Bitcoin for those of the people who don't know much about Bitcoin, how payments work and what UTXOs actually are, and then diving a bit deeper into sort of the management and the selection side of it. So always starting off with Magic Internet Money, and just giving them a brief run through of how kind of Bitcoin sort of works is on the network level, touching briefly on some more advanced topics, but not going too deep into it. I sort of highlighted money issuance, basically to get into mining and figuring out where these UTXOs or coins actually come from. I've kind of included this because I want people to have a vague understanding of what coin-based transactions are, and how UTXOs come out of those. I then run through what UTXOs are and a few of their properties. Basically, they're sort of the resulting outputs of Bitcoin transactions, which then get used for future inputs and resulting in more outputs, and so on it goes. But just highlighting that they're sort of uniquely identifiable and sort of traceable back to their origins. So they have this kind of provenance, or what's referred to sometimes as kind of like peeling chains through payments, and how that can then later affect things like privacy and payments. I give a brief overview of what's actually happening under the hood with Bitcoin wallets, and how wallet balances, whilst they may seem really simple on the outset, are actually basically this amalgamation or sum of UTXOs which are held within the addresses that a wallet owns, just to get a brief understanding really of the fact that the screens that we look at with Bitcoin wallets are great, but they're very oversimplified of what's actually happening. I'll then go through sort of Bitcoin transactions, just to make sure that people really understand that UTXOs are used as inputs, and they are then sort of reconfigured and then come out the other side as outputs, and also getting them used to things like payment outputs and change outputs, and how that's important later for basically the outcomes or how we want to optimize for transactions, again, particularly for privacy. I also give this analogy of gold, which maybe some of you guys can give some feedback on later. But I was listening to a podcast with Shinobi, and he kind of talks about how UTXOs are pretty similar to a gold transaction in the sense that you would give your gold coins to, well, in this case, it would be like the network or like the transaction that you're constructing, and then how actually UTXOs are basically sort of like kind of melted down and then reworked into brand new coins. He kind of gives the analogy of not blank checks, but sort of like programmable banknotes, and then how when you use them or spend them, they get wiped clean and then remade new. But I thought that this analogy actually makes a bit more sense if you think about gold and how it's literally like melted down and then reforged. So just trying to make some understandable sort of comparisons to what people might know. The second section of the presentation is sort of, yeah, as it says, diving a little bit deeper into UTXO management and coin control or coin selection, going through the various aspects of how wallets implement this within their applications, and then the effects and outcomes of how they implement them. So the first thing I sort of briefly touch on is UTXO management. Some wallets obviously provide labeling as like an effective tool to sort of help people manage their UTXOs. I sort of mentioned that this can be used for sort of individuals, or maybe it can be used for groups or even just institutions. So, you know, it could be like, these are my Coinbase coins or my Binance coins, and making sure that you don't overlap or mix them. Or I sort of use this term cross-contamination. So we're not cross-contaminating our coins. And again, particularly for sort of like privacy later on. But really just, yeah, kind of touching upon how labeling is currently used by some wallets, but it's not really like a best known practice. It's more of an advanced practice, but how it can really help mitigate some privacy loss down the line. I then kind of talk about like what actually is coin control, being able to select UTXOs for specific payments when you're building out transactions, and being able to like select the inputs and knowing exactly why you should or shouldn't select certain inputs, depending on obviously what the transaction is for, who you're sending it to, and then having a decent understanding of like what those outcomes are going to be. Worth probably mentioning, I touched upon the hard constraints of coin selection, because I think you need to know at least like what's possible, what's actually possible during Bitcoin transactions. So for example, the transactions obviously need to have sufficient amounts of funding. There's various things to do with block space and fees, which will maybe limit sometimes the inputs which you want to create. And then also obviously trying to, at all costs, I guess, like minimize dust and minimize sort of useless coins that are left in your wallet. This was kind of what I really went into in that original page for the design guide, but talking about different types of coin control and how this is actually implemented in all wallets. So the majority of the time, wallets opt for some sort of automatic, you know, I say coin selection because I think coin control is usually referred to more for the manual coin selection, but automatic, basically using sort of an automatic algorithm to select which UTXOs are used as inputs for a transaction. That, again, that's the majority of Bitcoin wallets. And then you have some or a handful of Bitcoin wallets which allow for users to take manual control and select their own UTXOs, which is great. It's, I would argue, a very advanced practice, and not particularly common practice. And I guess with this malleability, there comes, you know, with great, you know, there comes a lot of responsibility with this. and you have to be pretty aware of what the outcomes are going to be of those selections. So this is what I'll then get into now, which is, yeah, basically the effects and outcomes of our UTXO selection, particularly with this kind of, it goes for automatic as well as manual coin selection, because both are affected. And it will give users a better, I think, a better understanding of the issue and why UTXOs are something which should be cared about by designers and developers, and how we can maybe go about by designing better solutions really for it. So again, the most common effects are obviously speed, cost, and privacy, or at least those are the three which I will concentrate on. So yeah, for speed, obviously the miners, they want to prioritize transactions which have higher fee rates, because that's going to benefit them. So obviously, if we attach higher fee rates to Bitcoin transactions, we have a higher likelihood that they'll be packaged into the next block, or at least the next few blocks. There are certain ways that you can optimize for this. Obviously, increasing the fee rate, which is set in Satoshis per byte, or increasing the transaction size by increasing the amount of inputs or the complexity of the transaction itself. So usually, higher the cost, the faster it is. So obviously, flip that coin, literally, excuse the pun, and we get into cost. So the way that we can optimize for lower fees is obviously by decreasing the transaction or the fee rate, and then obviously minimizing the amount of transaction inputs. I'd probably give some sort of analogy to help people understand here, is that if you imagine you're paying for your groceries in a store, because it took me a while to sort of get my head around like the complexity of transactions and what actually determines the transaction fee, or the sort of bite size of a transaction. The way that I would probably describe it is by saying, if you went to pay for $5 worth of groceries and you put a bag of coins on the teller's desk, they're going to have to sit there for quite a long time counting those coins. And you can basically say, you know, the more amount of coins that you include in that bag, the higher the complexity of the transaction, and the more the miner is going to want to sort of charge for that. So that's one way of thinking about cost, and how to try and keep that low. The third, and arguably most important, or at least in my eyes, without trying to include too much bias, is maybe privacy. So I briefly mentioned this idea of sort of like peeling chains and uniquely identifiable sort of provenance data of UTXOs, but basically being able to trace UTXOs back through a public ledger, through the transactions from which they came, and the UTXOs before them, which were used as inputs to create that output, and so on and so forth. It goes all the way back to this Coinbase transaction or multiple Coinbase transactions. And trying to get users to sort of understand the implications of privacy, and how when you send certain coins to certain individuals or contacts from your wallet, they might, or you might expose, or you probably will expose, certain amounts of sensitive information, whether it's your addresses or your wallet balances, via those UTXOs and via those transactions. So trying to come up with ways to optimize by privacy. One way is obviously minimizing your change outputs. If there's no change, it's harder to trace back to a change address, which then has that balance on it. Using things like UTXO management or labeling UTXOs to try not to cross-contaminate various things. For example, I might not want to pay a private friend, whoever that is. I don't want to go into too many privacy-focused analogies. I want to avoid various set stereotypes with this. But let's say you want to make a private transaction, maybe try and avoid using a coin which you got paid, you know, a quarter of your annual salary in. Someone might know how much you get paid, that type of thing. And then obviously using things like coin joins and mixers to sort of blur this provenance data and creating sort of a non-set coin. And then the final part of this presentation will be sort of designing for solutions. So now hopefully, this is obviously a brief overview, but we'll be going into a bit more details. But hopefully by this point, the people who are in these workshops would have got a better idea of what the problem is at hand. And they'll then maybe have a bit more motivation for sort of designing for these solutions or these sort of UX problems in Bitcoin wallets. The thing I've sort of highlighted here is a lot of these features with UTXO management and coin control are sort of mostly used by experienced Bitcoiners and wallets. And they're sort of taking advantage of a lot of these privacy features of Bitcoin. But how do we get these perks into the hands of people who are entry level? How do we make sort of privacy like a standard in Bitcoin rather than making it an advanced feature? So here are a couple of, I've sort of included a couple of case studies or like really short prototypes just to kind of spur people's imagination. This one is hypothetically sort of switching between a wallet which has maybe two different automatic coin selection algorithms. The first might be a very standard algorithm, something like first in, first out, or minimizing inputs. The second might be a privacy-focused algorithm, something like branch and bound, which I believe Wasabi uses, or Blackjack. Again, it's getting quite complicated when you start analyzing what those algorithms actually are and what they do. But just knowing that there's maybe like a private mode is something which could benefit users. Then getting a little bit more customized, again, if we want to put this in the control of the users, is basically allowing them to, instead of just going between like a standard and a private mode, maybe allowing them to actually select the input or select the algorithm themselves so they can choose what it is that they want to optimize for. And then the third would be a basically manual coin selection or coin control and getting this into mobile wallets. I'm trying to make it as friendly a user experience as possible. And I think part of that experience is making sure that as designers, one of the challenges, which I think I'd present in these workshops, is that these people need to, kind of understand the implications of the coins that they select and what that has in terms of the fee or the privacy, because you don't want people like manually selecting coins and then they have an astronomical like transaction fee. It's kind of counterproductive. So putting this control in people's hands, but also making sure that we somewhat make it like an enjoyable or easy to use sort of user experience. And then, basically trying to rope in as many designers as possible and getting people thinking about these problems and these solutions and then going away and actually helping solve them. So that is the sort of presentation that I've put together. And then do I still have a little bit more time? I can introduce a tool that I've been working on. Cool. Yeah, thumbs up. So with basically with this coin selection stuff, Johns and I started working on a tool, or this website utxo.tools, to try and put UTXO management and coin selection into sort of like a simulated environment, and being able to allow users to kind of like simulate these transactions without the literal cost of screwing up like a fee rate or selecting the wrong coins and losing privacy and things like that. So the idea, this is again still very much in work, but the idea is that you can kind of like enter an amount of how much you want to send, and then this bit, which is not fully configured yet, is what I would like to do is allow people to sort of switch between different coin selection algorithms, so they can see UTXOs coming out of their wallet like into the transaction and how those actually happen. Although for now, unfortunately, this isn't, as I say, configured, so we can just do it manually. But providing designers with challenges like, okay, well, so now you understand that minimizing change outputs is going to help with privacy. Like, how would you construct this transaction? So yeah, basically like dragging over UTXOs, which you can see how much the transaction is funded with, but trying to like minimize the change output of it. So the change output of this one would be like 2 Bitcoin, which in the grand scheme of things, this guy is an absolute whale. So that's obviously better than having like, 47 Bitcoin as your change output. So just trying to basically like create interactive tools which don't cost people money, but allow them to understand what happens kind of under the hood in wallets and with transactions. And then hopefully there'll be a bit of time for some feedback, but yeah, so I've been working on that, but sort of in a Figma file. And the idea is that, or one of the problems which hopefully you guys can provide some good feedback on, is the navigation of that element. So the way that the website is configured at the moment is by seeing your wallet, constructing a transaction, and then creating the inputs. But creating like a fairly easy, like navigable system where maybe someone could switch between like automatic or manual coin selection, choosing the algorithm, or like instructing them how to like drag and drop UTXOs into a transaction. I think that it's also gonna be beneficial for people to see where UTXOs actually come from. So being able to, for example, actually receive a transaction or like simulate some sort of payment request. So using different types of Bitcoin addresses, or requesting, amounts, or label sort of forms, things like that. And then actually like generating invoices, creating those invoices, and then in real time sort of seeing those UTXOs get created and then drag and dropping, or at least sort of dropping themselves into your wallet. So you're like, okay, that's where a UTXO comes from. It comes from these outputs of this payment that this person has just done. And hopefully getting it a little bit more educational as well. I haven't quite come up with some sort of analytical tool, but I should think there's probably some cool ways of actually being able to like visualize UTXOs and seeing which addresses have been exposed to certain contacts or users, and then just having like a general learn section where hopefully we can provide some cool like educational resources for users to learn about these weird and wonderful things. So yeah, that is a very brief overview of what I've been working on for the last little while. Any feedback is very welcome. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing. Awesome. Anyone want to take the floor?
Yeah, I'd like to speak for a minute. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting, Ed. To be perfectly honest, I had to step away from the computer for a moment, so I think I missed like the last like 3 minutes of what you said. But so you may have actually already covered what I'm about to say. But one idea that kind of popped in my head is you were talking about a lot of that in terms of giving the user different options and control is like, what if something like your UTXO tool could be presented to the user like at the time of transaction? I'm not sure if you covered something like that already, so apologies if I missed that, but just the idea that like instead of making it like this one-time choice, like turning privacy on or off, of like I could really see like it could become an interesting user interface thing where like a user is presented with like, you're going to send 0.5 Bitcoin to somebody, and it's like, it comes up with like a little window that's like, do you want to optimize for speed, cost, or privacy, or do you want to manually configure? And so if you like choose one of those options, it will like show you like, oh, hey, you want to optimize for speed? Okay, but you're going to lose your privacy with this address, right? Or if you optimize for privacy, it will pop up with a warning being like, but this is going to cost you this higher fee. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, that's kind of, I think the problem with which I guess one of the things which I've tussled with is that you want to provide the user with like as much information as possible without making it like a super clunky user experience.
Yeah.
Without basically like providing a degree's worth of information in like a tiny wallet application.
Yeah.
So minimizing the amount of information maybe that you can give whilst maximizing the output of that information. So I think that's one of the challenges which I think designers have, is like, how do you make this as informative as possible, but without making it like too informative in a way, and something which just loses these users in transactions. So yeah, I think, but that would be, I mean, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned like, oh, well, you can optimize for speed, but maybe you'll lose a bit of privacy. And I think Andreas talks a little bit about it when he's sort of like what to optimize for in Bitcoin transactions. He kind of talks about like this triangle of speed, cost, and privacy, and how if you choose one, you're going to kind of detriment the other two. And I think that's really worth understanding as the user. Is like, it's very hard to have all three of those things. Obviously, the optimal design or solution is to try and cater for all three of those things. But the reality is that if you want to have a really fast transaction, you're probably going to have to pay a slightly like higher fee. Or if you want to optimize for privacy, then, if you want to minimize your change outputs, then unfortunately you might have to maximize the amount of inputs a transaction has to find some sort of exact match, which is then going to shoot up the cost of the transaction. So it's very hard to feed three birds with one seed. Trying to use a slightly more friendly analogy. And there's always going to be some sort of trade-off, I think. Or at least at the moment, there's always going to be some sort of trade-off. But just educating users that A, that trade-off exists, but then also B, like, well, which one do you want to pick? And which one do you think is most important to you, or least important? So yeah, that'd be really cool to introduce that in wallets.
I had a number of things I picked up, if that's all right. I also found the designing for solutions part, the most interesting to me. Maybe that's because we are this crowd. And that's when I kind of really thought things were starting to get interesting, and how you showed in settings these various options. I thought the privacy mode was a bit unclear. Like, interesting, but like, what is that, right? Like, it's unclear what the effect is. So I'm not sure if I would use that without an explanation that is kind of making the user aware of what's actually going to happen when you flick the switch. The other one where you could actually pick, like you basically say, okay, there are some algorithms, regardless if you have chosen them or not, there's something that has to pick the UTXOs. And I thought that was interesting when you listed the different methods. But maybe instead of naming, kind of listing them as the technical term, first in, first out, last in, first out, blackjack, right? Instead, maybe list them as what they're optimizing for. That might make more sense to the user, right? Like, do I care mostly about privacy? Then, I know which one to choose. So maybe flipping the actual sort of naming of them is something I would consider. The sort of first part of the presentation, there were just a few small things I thought about. The gold analogy with the smelting and stuff. I see where you're coming from, but I didn't quite. It was sort of almost more work for me than staying in Bitcoin land. So I mean, that might just be me. Again, some of the images, especially the mining images with the sort of digging in the mud, I reacted a little bit to that one. It didn't feel super positive. Again, maybe it's just me, but this sort of illustrating this new technology with like old world images felt a little bit off to me. And then I just noticed a few spelling mistakes here and there. So nothing major, but just might be worth going through it and checking for those things. And my last comment was about the simulator, or this kind of UTXO site that seemed really fun. The only very, very minor comment is to maybe use realistic numbers. I think it always helps, both for the people using it, but also when designing it, you might actually realize that like, oh, it's actually quite hard when there's like 5 zeros in there. It's very easy when it's like just 2 numbers, but using realistic numbers can always be a good idea.
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you very much for that feedback.
Otherwise, it's really exciting to see, because it is an advanced feature now, but it would be good if it wasn't so scary and not so niche. So good work.
Thanks.
I just want to second Daniel's opinion about the mining, like the people digging and the mud mining image. I actually had a pretty strong reaction to that too when I saw it for the first time. I just got excited thinking about design stuff after that and forgot to mention that.
I have some feedback too, but I'll send that over separately in maybe even some Figma stuff here, because I think we're going to run short on time.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, cool. Ed, did you post a link in the chat to the Figma? Oh, yeah, okay, cool. And then people know the site as well. All right, cool. Yeah, thanks, Ed. That was awesome. Stephen, did you want to go next? This is the
Sure.
The private key backup builder.
Yeah. I'll try and share my screen here. Okay. How do I computer? Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, so what I'm looking at right now is a little microsite. I will paste this into the chat for everyone. But yeah, a little background on this. So basically, Daniel is working on this page for the design guide about wallet backups. He had kind of created this draft template of, basically like a paper wallet backup and all the information you might need. And on Slack, Steve had posted, that he liked it, but thought that, there's a lot of complexity with wallet backups, like, the different types of wallets are going to need different types of information, and it's difficult to simplify it down. Christoph had the idea, well, could we turn that into a actual, like a kind of like a template builder to help the user construct their own wallet backup? And so then the MIT Hackathon was that weekend, and me and Christoph ended up having a team together and building a prototype for the hackathon. So I'll go ahead and show you. If you click on the prototype here, it will take you to the clickable prototype that we built. And if at any point in this process, you stop seeing what I'm talking about, let me know. We had an issue on another call where Figma wasn't responding anymore. But anyways, I'll quickly walk through this thing. So basically, this is a proposed landing page, and it greets the user and says, "Hey, you want to build your own Bitcoin backup sheet? Capture all the information you need to feel confident about your backup." And it gives you a little example. This is the kind of thing that we're producing over here. It's a basic template for a paper wallet. So we get started. And as we proceed through it, the first thing we do is we ask the user, does your wallet have multiple signers? Because if they are using a multi-sig wallet, that's going to drastically affect how complicated their backup is. They might need multiple sheets that go to multiple different people. So we ask them that question right at the outset to figure out how many they need. I'm going to backtrack here, and I'm going to say, no, we don't have multiple signers. And then the next thing we ask them for is what type of wallet they're using. The idea being that for different types of wallets that are popular, like a Ledger or a Trezor or anything else, we could have like a preset template already for that wallet. Like we could reach out to the manufacturer and kind of ask them what types of details the user is going to need to be able to restore the wallet. But in lieu of that, we can also allow the user to create their own template. So we say, create my own. And then we ask for a little bit of description, like is it a hardware wallet or a software wallet? And we ask them for how many seed words their wallet has. And then as you see over here, like if I go like here, it's like set the 12 seed words and I set the 24, and then it updates the number of fields that the user has. And we say next, ask them if it has a PIN, ask them if it has a passphrase. Then you can see it added the little passphrase section on here. And then this is a little review screen that gives the user a chance to go back and edit their answers if they need to. And then when they finish it, it gives them this template to download. They could download it as a PDF or they could print it out. And then once they print it out, they take a pen and they go in and they write down all their details on their own time. So that's the basic gist of it. And if you're interested in kind of pursuing a little bit more of what we did, there's a link also on the microsite to the actual Figma design. So if anybody wants edit access to that, just let me know. And I mean, I'll just really show you kind of some quick overview of how we started here. I think initially I started off with just kind of a real basic wireframe, just black and white, because my first goal is to really just figure out like what kinds of questions we need to ask the user in order to generate a good wallet backup. And then Christoph and I batted around different design directions and stuff like that. And I did want to kind of show off some of Christoph's ideas from earlier in the day, because well, I think they might be on a different page and I'm failing to find them. But, Christoph had some ideas about, yeah, here we go. Like, trying to kind of humanize it a little more and, put some graphics in there and stuff, and which I think is a good idea and something we should consider. I was trying to keep it as like basic as possible just for the weekend, but I do think it would be nice to consider like having some kind of artwork or something that kind of humanizes the design a little bit. But really, the most important question is like, are we asking the right kinds of questions to the user? So like, are there specific types of wallets that we're missing, or specific types of details that the user might need that we're not asking? So, and also another kind of design consideration that Christoph and I had, batted around is like, what like should the user be allowed to enter in information? So like we're basing this whole idea off of we're using this to generate a paper wallet from them. It would make it easier on people if they could just paste in some of their details as they're creating this. So like when it asks them like, what are your 24 seed words, we could put in a place for them to paste their seed words. Now, there's the kind of it's something I feel kind of uncomfortable with a little bit, because, I feel like I want to make the technology as easy to use for people as possible, but I also want to kind of, part of me wants to make some hard limits and like kind of tell users, like discourage them, like, no, don't ever paste any sensitive Bitcoin information into a website, that you don't trust. But, also it's, at the same time, maybe there's some less sensitive information that, could make this easier, like, XPubs and ZPubs and stuff like that, isn't going to give away everything. It's not going to give away, like, I don't know enough about multi-sig to really be able to comment on this fully, but like the idea that we're thinking is that like for a multi-sig wallet, you would want to have not only the recovery seed, but also the ZPubs, right? Well, it would make the process easier on the user if they could just paste in their ZPub. And I don't think that would be a security consideration if that information leaked, so long as their seed wasn't leaked. But I stand to be corrected on that. So we just kind of want to have a discussion about this, about like what what kinds of considerations we need to have. But really just the ultimate goal here is to just try and make the process of backing up your wallet very, very easy, and to guide people through this process and make sure they understand what they're doing. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and we've talked about the possibility of this being a project that we continue to work on, and so right now we're just looking to see if anybody else is interested in this and collaborating on this project, and if anybody has any feedback on how to improve it. I'm done for now.
Again, very cool. I had some thoughts around the multi-signature, because like I'm in the process of like trying to figure out how to like document a multi-signature setup for in the event like I'm not around. And so like there are some instances where like your multi-key setup is one's a cloud backup, encrypted cloud backup, one's a hardware wallet, and one might be with a third-party custodian who has your third key. In the encrypted cloud backup scenario, all use cases I've seen say as soon as you reveal your seed phrase, it is now compromised. So that deters me straight away from wanting to write it down anywhere. The hardware wallet case is probably okay in this scenario. You take your Trezor or whatever, you write down your seed phrase, but then you've also got some third-party custodian which has your private key, which if you was to request them to reveal it again, it will compromise things. So I definitely feel like for multi-sig setup, it can get quite complicated depending on what the setup is. But then also if it's the most maybe simplistic multi-key setup is literally you just have 3 hardware wallets, you use Spectre or maybe the newer Dux Reserve, you write down all your seed phrases and you're good to go. So then the question becomes, how do we deal with one, the bit more complicated multi-sig scenario, and 2, what recommendations do we actually give of the storing of the physical, if they were to print it off, for example, like the physical pieces of paper, like safety deposit boxes, or make sure they're geographically dispersed, all of that kind of stuff. I wonder if this tool is the place for that information as well.
I think you're definitely ahead of the curve, Connor, which is good. You should be. But I've been grappling with the same thing for single key wallets. And it's complicated enough. So I hopefully will also get to the multi-key at some point. But literally just, the tool that Stephen and Christoph built is great. But if you land on that tool with no other knowledge, it can still be scary and difficult. So it's almost like the tool needs a companion. And the page that I've been trying to work on, there's a link in the chat, is sort of meant to be that companion. Because, for example, like if you have a passphrase, you should definitely not write it down on the same piece of paper that you write the seed phrase, right? Which will then sort of, you will then have, almost done away with the security that you gained by adding a passphrase. So there's a lot of complexities, and I think I'm with you, Stephen, in that I would like the tool to be fairly dumb, almost maybe just recommending a set of pre-made PDFs on the back end. There are a lot of different combinations things could go, but there aren't that many. I think it's fancy to have it generate things on the fly, but if you're not actually entering any information, we might sort of be creating something that's a bit too smart or doing too much work every time. Just a thought. But there are hardware wallets, and there are a small number of them. less than 10 makers, pretty much, right? We could cover 90% if you only make it for 3 of them, or 4 maybe. And then there are software wallets. So anyway, that's not to discourage, the making of the smart version of this, but I sort of started off thinking, oh, we could just update a set of PDFs that we have on GitHub somewhere. That could be resources. And you could still create the nice fancy website that sort of asks you questions and guides you through. But then at the end, most of the time we should already have the template. So maybe the create your own is like a rare case. It sort of flip it on its head. Anyway, I think it's super cool that you did it, and you did it super quickly, and I think it makes people excited. And maybe it's a perfect thing that could be its own sort of microsite. But that brings me back to the question, Paul the next had some feedback on the PR that I made on this page. Like, hey, this seems to be geared towards end users. That was the intention. But it does obviously clash a little bit with all the rest of the content we have on the site. And if we start trying to send end users into the foundation chapter of the Bitcoin Design Guide, is that a good idea? So I was thinking on the fly here, maybe if there is a microsite, maybe that should also have this kind of guide on it, like what is a backup, and why do you need it? What different ways of securing your funds are there, and what's a passphrase, and which should you consider one? So open-ended questions here, but I'd love to hear your feedback on A, do these two things belong together, like your tool and the information? And B, should that be in the design guide, or should it live somewhere else?
I love the idea of incorporating some of your information into the backup helper. One of the first pieces of feedback that we got from the helper after the hackathon was a friend of mine who, is new to self-custody and, thought it looked cool, but was, it's asking for seed phrases, and he's like, well, why is this important? So I think it would be wonderful to have your information included in. How that looks from a design perspective, up to be decided. It could be like a guide section of the site. There's like the helper section and then the guide section, or it could be like inline help, like everything it asks you for has like a definition. But I'm loving what you've produced here on this page here, like especially this graph, the like 0 to 5 graph, and like showing the different levels of security and what they protect against. And I mean, in my mind, I think it belongs in on both sites, because some like the Bitcoin backup helper would benefit immensely from having this kind of guide information about explaining to an end user what a backup is and what the different types of backups are. I think that's also useful information to have on the Bitcoin Design Guide, because the designers and developers of these applications need to understand this information as well. But to Pav's point, I think it does make sense to gear the writing a little bit more to be targeted at the designer developer side of it. But the actual educational content, I think, belongs on both.
Yeah. Just as a comment there as well, Stephen, I think, as you said, it'd be awesome to integrate some of the educational stuff, which Daniel's talking about, into the stuff that you're working on. I guess one thought I have is like, one is kind of like pre and post, like backing up your wallet, like figuring out, for example, if it's something, should I use like a multi-signature wallet with like multiple like hardware wallets, whatever it is. One kind of like precedes the other. And so I guess a challenge might be like, how can you fit educational information into a design which then adapts to how they what they take from that educational information. But yeah, I mean, all of this stuff seems like really awesome.
Yeah, the pre and post is a really important question, right? You could imagine a site that was trying to promote Bitcoin self-custody. So way before you even have a seed phrase, right? Like guide to like, what should I do, right? Because if you only start helping them once they have a seed phrase, they might have already done a lot of work that wasn't helpful, or they went down the wrong route, for example, depending on the amount they wanted to store. Using a particular software wallet might not provide them with the, these levels that I'm trying to get to, right? I kind of now, after doing this exercise of the page, I was like, well, if I don't have a passphrase, backups are really vulnerable, right? Unless, this is all of scale, what's order range, right? Depending on the amount. But, I want to try and give people a place where they can learn what other people have learned in a much, much shorter period of time, not having to do it themselves, right? So, and I think we can improve that graphic with the numbers and the range, because if someone comes into Bitcoin thinking, well, I really am not planning to do more than $1,000, for my first step, or $100, then it's total overkill to start them on with passphrases and like multi-sigs. But on the other hand, if they do come in with that expectation, no, I want to put like 50K in here, then it's actually totally wrong to start them off with just like a cloud backup. Right? So I feel the question of like, is this site just, it could be very simple as like, okay, cool, you have a wallet, let's help you with the backup. Or it could start from the other end, like, no, we're aiming bigger here. We're like, want to target self-custody a bit more holistically, and maybe even before they've chosen a wallet.
I mean, my take was on a very, very single purpose tool. You have a backup, you don't know really how to go about it, or you have a wallet, you don't really know how to back it up well. This is just does exactly that and nothing more. But I think these things can evolve and change, see what the need is, put it out there, and then all of a sudden Connor comes up and he wants a crazy setup with 1,500 hardware wallets and 10 other things spread across the world for all his riches. And maybe it can integrate all of these things too. It would be kind of a cool challenge, because I mean, if I think about everybody here is doing research on how to do this stuff, and it's all in our heads and it's in documents here and all in there. And if we can all combine that into one tool where you can just click around a bit, and maybe there's a little info button that says, well, this is split into 2 sheets because of this and that reason, or like, this is what you do here, or, well, now that you've done that, make sure to do this. That'd be super fantastic if we can actually simplify it for even for ourselves, or even I was thinking about Ed's tool. It could also be a tool that helps designer understand these different wallet configurations also. I mean, I don't understand fully all of the options there either.
Hey guys, my Wi-Fi hasn't been cooperating today, so I'm not sure I heard. I'm sure I missed plenty of things on both presentations. Since we're talking about Stephen right now, and Christoph's work, I missed kind of what it does. I think I sort of imagine it now. I like that you could combine. Sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish somehow. I like the idea of combining educational with something that people could put together. Now, if this is going to be a website, I would refrain from letting people be able to copy their seed. I mean, maybe like all of the other details would be safer, but the seed itself, the seed phrase, I think should be something that should be done manually, because it is something to have it like in an app that's closed from the system, which hopefully hasn't gotten any malware or anything. It's a completely different security issue when you put it on a browser and people have extensions and a bunch of other things. So I would say refrain from having a seed phrase that you can copy and paste. That would be I do that. I love for it to be this sort of thing where it's educational also, like you were mentioning, for the product makers, because I think it'll be important for them to be able to have that available already, or to have that kind of a template available for people, especially because these backups change once you make transactions, or you know, these backups can change. So it's a sort of thing that you have to keep regenerating. And it's important that product makers have something that's easier available. Maybe it's about thinking about how to make this so that product makers could use it and integrate it into their systems in a simpler way. But I like it that I like that it's both educational, that it could be both educational for end users and also this thing that product makers could use. And I think I don't know, Ed, I have to think about based on your tool, I do think that you should focus on what it does, because like when you read it like first in, first out, at least for me, it was kind of hard to understand what the benefit of it was. And I know other people have also commented on that, on the idea of separating privacy and speed. And so it's easier to understand. I'm not sure if I have something turned off on my browsers. I couldn't actually use it, and I missed the part where you showed all of the steps, where I'm sure I'm kind of interested in looking at it. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But if I select coins, you know, and I simulate the transaction, maybe I have something turned off. Anyway.
Have you got the link to the Figma file as well? Have you in the chat?
I did copy it. I haven't looked at it. I just
Okay.
couldn't use it directly on the simulator.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I'll
it's
yeah.
also the UTXO.tools website is also just a work in progress. So actually, like simulating transactions doesn't quite work yet. It's just to kind of show where it's going. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just thought I was doing something wrong. No, I'll look at the Figma file, and if I notice something, I'll let you know.
Cool.
And thank you for your presentation. I think I watched most of it, so I'll let you know any comments there. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You know what I found interesting is that for the design guide, a bunch of times we had conversations about introducing animations and prototype to communicate things. But this is kind of also what we're talking about, creating these interactive tools that then allow you to make some choices and see what happens and understand why things are the way they are. So I feel like this whole tools, combining them with information and education goes pretty closely hand in hand, or it can go if it's done the right way. And there are some really tricky things here with the UTXOs also that are just in static information. It's just so hard to communicate. But maybe this interactive stuff is exactly what we need.
Now, what about actual wallets that give you more freedom as far as coin control? Are we talking like Wasabi, or are there more options that we know of?
Yeah, most of the stuff that I've been looking at is sort of more privacy-oriented wallets. So as you said, sort of Wasabi, or even just like the Bitcoin Core. Like GUI is kind of interesting. I've been playing around with like the testnet a lot and like selecting coins using that. One thing I've noticed is that in coin control, one of the things which I touched upon is that there isn't really any of this warning of like, if you maybe select inputs which have like create like an astronomical fee, like it doesn't give you a warning of that. It just assumes that it's like, oh, this person has selected manual coin control, so they surely know what they're doing, and they know what the outcome of that is going to be. And yeah, I mean, I think also, as Christoph sort of mentioned, like using these interactive and like kind of, they're meant to be kind of playful, right? These playful tools, to hopefully make people feel slightly less intimidated about using them in the first place. You know, like riding a bike is always kind of scary the first time you do it, but you know, you use stabilizers and then you eventually take those stabilizers off, and then you go on like a highway or whatever it is, like you get used to, it's all relative, right? Like, and I think with Bitcoin as well, it's always kind of scary, but there's an element that you get more comfortable like the more times you do it. So I kind of wanted to like remove finance from it so that people aren't worried about they're not too worried about screwing up a transaction, but they still can see like the effects of what happens when they do something like that. And then my final point would probably be like using these tools to just stimulate design like focus. You know, I or we might not be the people to solve these issues, but if we can get a designer to understand the problem and then just start turning some cogs in their mind, then they might design the solution in 2, 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is. So it's kind of just, yeah, creating playful tools to start a conversation really and get people like understanding what these issues are. I think that's the main goal of the work that I've been doing.
I like
Cool.
That sounds like a good focus. I'm sorry, Connor, I interrupted you, but yeah.
No, I was just gonna say that time's run out, so I'm gonna stop recording. I think that was a nice way to to finish it. And we can of course hang around and continue the chat after. But thank you. So sorry, Daniel, that we don't have much time to look at the stuff you've been doing.
No, that's cool. But I would encourage everyone to go and look at that page. I linked to in the chat, or it's also in the PR about the backup page, and just give me feedback. Because the high level thing I'm grappling with still is, I was writing it for the end user, and I'm not sure yet if we should totally rewrite it for the purpose of the guide.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, feel free to hop off now, or hang around and continue the conversation. But thanks Ed, thanks Stephen, thanks everyone for their feedback as usual. Good session as usual. I feel like I was going to say something, but now I've forgotten. Never mind.
So one thing I was thinking of, and this is probably because I'm reading Sherlock Holmes. My son's all into detective stories right now, regarding the UTXOs. It would be kind of interesting if you reverse it. So instead of me putting together a transaction and sending it, you could say, well, you just bought pizza and you paid the pizza place in Bitcoin. And now you can kind of, let's see what we can find out about this little pizza place. And then we try to look at and maybe they reused an address, and maybe we learn about something, and then we can learn how much money they have in their I don't know, business wallet, or, like just kind of playing detective a little bit and creating different scenarios to see how much you can find out. There's probably some playful stuff you could come up.
I mean, it's kind of wild on the other side of the fence in Ethereum land, where there aren't UTXOs and they're just kind of address-based systems, and everybody's flaunting their addresses. So I mean, you can totally go and look up how much a lot of well-known people have in their wallets, which is weird, very weird.
Yeah, I think it's important information to have out there, so people know, and they can take better practices, and also so product makers include some of these choices, so people know.
I think the coin selection one as well. I feel like the labeling. I almost feel like for me, coin selection. I don't have confidence that I'm doing the right thing without some record of where it's come from or who it's come from or attributing it to something. It just feels very like off the cuff and guesswork. So I think we were talking before, weren't we, about like can a wallet have like a number of preset labels such that it doesn't become this task of having to label all of your UTXOs? Is there like a minimum set of labels? I don't know, general, holiday, travel, shopping, like I don't know, whatever. And then I don't know if you'd be able to go more granular than that, but making it something that is less of like a hard work for someone to do might make sense as well. Like having a sort of preset or predefined set of those could be interesting as well.
I'm also curious how we can Because ideally, we don't just come up with cool ideas here, but we also get it implemented somehow. And if we build some interactive tools, if we make this really practical, and maybe there's a bigger chance that somebody will come around and say, yeah, we're going to put this in our wallet. This is really awesome. Because we have the ability with prototypes and these things to make things more real than they are. We don't have to stay static.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I got excited when Ed started showing those different settings. And, there's a range there as well, right? Like we often talk about coin selection as like, oh, here we go, like full on manual mode. And like you got to become an accountant. But I like the ones where you could, because, most people don't realize that there's always coin selection. It's just that it's automatic, right? Like, and you talking about algorithms made me think about, maybe I could at least, I could be knowledgeable enough to pick a different strategy if I am explained, like, I care more about privacy, or I care more about cost or speed, right? Those are straightforward and understandable. So at least we could start by getting wallets that are doing automatic coin selection to surface those different options, because that's not that much more work for either them, well, maybe for them, but for the user, it's reasonable to take that as a next step. And then the end of the range is the full-on manual, right? But maybe over time we can get smarter there and get some kind of help as well. But Connor, you mentioned, what should the labels be? Can there be like predetermined ones? I think that's interesting to make it easier and quicker. But then it also brought up in my mind, like, well, why are we doing this? And that can also be different for different people, right? Like, again, like if you're trying to maximize either of those 3 dimensions, you will have different strategies for labeling or different needs, right? Like if you just care about cost, you don't actually need to know where it came from. You just need to see the size and what impact that will have on the cost. But if privacy, which I think is the number one reason for doing this, and Ed, actually, I forgot to mention, I think maybe you should bring that to the front of those 3, the reasons for doing this. I think privacy should definitely be the first one, because the other ones happen anyway, right? And are more intertwined. But if you're labeling for privacy, then travel doesn't make sense, right? Or shopping doesn't necessarily make sense. It's much more important, like, where did this come from? Where did this go? What do I need to keep separated? Is my work life and my private life? That's, I don't know, because I haven't done it. And that's, I think we have to do these things. We have to try them to really understand what we should be designing for people, so that they don't have to do the work again, right?
And Ed, I know you were mentioned to kind of carry off of what Daniel was saying. I know you said you were kind of hesitant to talk about the privacy aspect of it too much because of the negative connotations that's going to have. Because hey, you mentioned privacy and everybody just thinks darknet. Darknet marketplaces. Maybe if you did choose to make privacy more prevalent in your presentation, maybe you should just get ahead of that and leave some kind of comment in there that this privacy is useful if you're running a darknet marketplace. It's also useful if you don't want your violent ex to to be tracking your transactions and where you're going. Like, that's a perfectly valid thing. Or if you live in a country with an oppressive government, I honestly feel like talking about a violent ex might even be a more relatable thing. I don't know. I mean, but to someone who lives under an oppressive government, that would be a more relatable thing. It's one of these kinds of things that, from my perspective as Americans, it's like, it's part of the privacy argument. People are like, but oppressive governments. And then everyone's like, but what about child porn? It's no one can seem to get the argument, straight. But I feel like something like, you don't want to be criminally abused by it. You don't want someone to see what's in your wallet and then try to take a crowbar to you after you're leaving work one day, right? Or you don't want a crazy stalker following you around and seeing, who you're transacting with. So, I mean, maybe just something. I feel like there's ways that we can talk about privacy. We can shift the narrative away from these illegal things and make it more about, preserving your own safety and dignity.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I was just going to say one thing. Where does most of our money come from? Our employer. You want your employer to be able to see how much you spend, where you spend all your money, and when and where and how, and maybe piece all that stuff together. I don't think you have to reach to some, nefarious things. I think just these basic things also make sense.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
Yeah, I think privacy is one of those ones where it's like, unfortunately, a lot of the conversations that you have with people is that they kind of, it's the typical argument of like, oh, well, I don't mind if the government, reads my text because I'm not doing anything wrong. And it's like, well, you don't mind until you mind, and then by that point, it's too late. So I think I think I actually kind of agree with you, and I will take that advice. Just like maybe nip it in the bud before the mind even goes there of like, oh, well, why is he giving this whole thing about privacy? And I guess it's kind of ironic. I have actually done some kind of under the cuff interviews with people who transact on the dark net to just figure out like how much they actually know about Bitcoin and like how they use it, if they use it. And it's actually staggering how inefficient some people who use the darknet are at creating private Bitcoin transactions. It's like they're kind of using it like they're using the wrong end of a hammer in a way. So there's actually like this huge irony that is like, oh, well, only drug dealers use Bitcoin. It's like, well, they might, but they're using it really badly. And so not that I'm going to start giving workshops to drug dealers of how to make, we're not going to endorse that. But yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, relating it to that, or even just using an example, you're walking down the street and maybe you see someone there wearing like a Bitcoin t-shirt and, you strike up a conversation and then they want to know how to use it. And you say, okay, well, hey, set up a wallet now and I'll send you some Bitcoin. And maybe you use a UTXO, which is like, you use the UTXO that you've just received from your boss. And for some reason, he pays you an annual salary in one big go. And maybe you send the UTXO that's worth like $20,000 or $50,000. And then obviously the change output is huge and goes back to you if you're only sending $5. But now this person maybe knows, how much you have at that change address and wants to stop them being like, okay, well, he did this out of the goodness of his heart, but maybe I'll follow him home with a crowbar. And so like you can go through all these like weird and wonderful analogies of why privacy is really important. But like you said, maybe even something like your crazy ex, like a lot of people relate to that. So just making it simple and relatable. And I think, as you said, maybe actually nipping it in the bud before you allow people's minds to go to these places of like, well, why are they talking about privacy? Why is it so important? And
I don't think this has to be super controversial, actually. Just like I'm on Christoph's side, like most of us get paid from an employer. And also the bank, we're replacing the bank, but one benefit of the bank was that not everybody can go into the bank's books and see what's going on, right? But now we're replacing all that with an open system. But one thing we have to be mindful of with an open system is that it's open, right? So we need to create something to counter for that. And personal financial privacy is not a weird concept. It's perfectly, it's almost, well, it exists today more than in this world, right? So, and most people aren't worried about the bank looking at what you have because that's their role, right? So I don't think it has to be super controversial.
I agree with that. It's the usual privacy arguments tend to be about like, do I trust the government or do I not? Or like, do I trust Facebook or some other platform or do I not trust them? But this isn't about, do we trust a single party? Because it's a public blockchain and anybody can see it. You then have to be like, well, do I trust everybody in the world? No. So it's a completely different paradigm.
Yeah, we're also. I don't think we're also trying to sell people on Bitcoin here. When we're designing a wallet, obviously you want to make it as fast, you want to make it as private, you want to make it as easy to use. It's just a thing. Like, why not make it as private as possible by default for as many users as possible? I mean, that seems like a very logical goal where you don't even have to think about it much, unless you're maybe Google and you like data collection or other things.
Yeah.
I have a side track here, which is the term UTXO, which I find a mouthful and pretty off-putting in general. I mean, I get it now, but it took me a while, and I still stumble every time I try to pronounce it. And yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a better way to talk about it or explain it, because where you were going, Ed, with the gold analogy, right? Like, we can actually use paper bills and coins as well, right? Like, I can have $100 in a wide variety of forms, right? I can have $100 bills, I can have $100 bill, I can have two $50, endless combinations. And the UTXOs are just fractions. Well, yeah, whatever. Technically, they're one thing, but like, how do you explain them? And it's we have this problem with the name Bitcoin includes the word coin, and then when you say, oh, you can store your coins in a wallet, like, but they're not all of the same denomination. It gets really complicated, but I'm just I find it hard to approach a Bitcoin beginner with the term UTXO. It's not friendly.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, it's a really interesting point, just in terms of like the language, because obviously I was trying to, that presentation as well is like a very, I guess it's like the sort of the thin end of like a very wide triangle there. I've also come up with, the idea was to also give like documents which go into a lot of those slides in a lot more details for people if they want to sort of like do further research. But yeah, I sort of was thinking about this language stuff, and like, I also hate the term UTXO. It's super confusing. So the more colloquial term, people use like coins, coin control, whatever it is. And like you said, you can have $100 in all sorts of denominations, whether it's like a 5-cent coin, multiple of those, or like two $50 bills. One of the problems that I've come across, and maybe again, this is just my bias, so I'd love to hear everyone else's opinion, is that with notes and coins, there's like a uniform presence to it, right? Like, it's a $50 bill. It is exactly $50 worth in that bill. Whereas with UTXOs, it's not like you can only have a 0.25 BTC UTXO or a 0.5 or what. So they are programmably different. And I think people understand that point, is that they're programmably different. But even when it comes to language, like even the term coin, I was trying to kind of shy away. I think there needs to be an alternative even to something like coin, because I think when people think coin, they think a whole denomination of like a £1 coin or like a 50 cents coin or a 20 cents coin. They're set denominations of it. And even also, one thing I find a lot of people find confusing is, like you said, the term Bitcoin. When you think of coins, sometimes you think of a whole Bitcoin. A lot of people find it hard to get their head around the fact that they can own fractions of a Bitcoin. So I think the language question needs to be something which is grappled by a lot of minds and something which needs to be thought about a lot. So yeah, really interesting that you brought that up.
We definitely need a section on like the design metaphors and like the abstractions and stuff like that, because this is like a whole philosophical, like abstract. We're all participating in this shared hallucination of money. Like so, like what we call stuff is it's definitely a deep rabbit hole. I'd love to see a section of that in the guide somewhere. There, that would be cool.
It's kind of a perennial debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I think that one of the things that makes it difficult is when something holds additional qualities, right? So when you're thinking about UTXO, it's not just a group of coins or bills, it's something that's actually traceable. And then you think, well, should we stick then with something like UTXO and find better ways of explaining it? And I don't know, it's one of those things that you have to balance out. And sometimes I wonder if the educational part would be what would make it stick out in your head, you know? It's a UTXO, it's a weird term. It's something unusual, maybe you'll remember it. It's like when we use Twitter, we say, hey, I tweeted, right? But would you have ever thought of that? No, maybe they could have chosen something like, I don't know, like a different way of calling it, but they called it a tweet. So I think
asking engineers to create good naming conventions. You're asking a lot there.
Yeah, I just sent an issued text snippet.
Yeah.
ITS. Yeah. Did you see my ITS?
But the another problem here is that I think the term UTXO is incorrectly used, because not everything is unspent. Once it is spent, it becomes an input, and then it becomes an UTXO again, an output, and so it's like there's like something there that morphs, and it gets called different names at different times based on where you're referring it to from. If it's in your wallet versus whether it's in the transaction. So yeah, something else. I wish we could just use the term transactions. Like, I got a transaction, I'm passing it on to you, and you're passing it to somebody else. But it's not quite that simple. But I wish there was something simpler.
Isn't it funds? I received funds from you. I sent funds on. I got change back. But yeah, I also am a bit wary. You know, it's easy to come from the outside and say, oh, none of this makes sense. I'm going to rename everything. And then nobody else renames anything, and you're the only one. And that's why you often see wallets that use, you know, unusual namings or, you know, unconventions. So it's hard to do that on your own. But yeah, the term UTXO is a particular nag of mine. But it feels like funds, right? Like I received funds, I send funds. I have to pick. I have to select which funds I'm going to send.
You know, I feel like in the UTXO tools, maybe you don't use UTXO. Maybe you just call them Connor's coins or.
Hi, Connor.
See you, Connor. Thanks for hosting. Maybe you call them Steven's coins that are in my wallet now, and then they become my coins, and then they're in Alexa's wallet or something like that. You just kind of avoid it altogether.
Yeah, I think maybe. I mean, certainly. In the UI and the user experience, you don't have to mention UTXOs. I think, you know, in your mockups, Ed, you know, there's used coin selection, which I think is fairly intuitive to most people. So it's definitely better, and it's mostly us that talk about UTXOs. Cool. Well, thank you for bringing this topic up. It was very interesting to think about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for everyone's feedback and stuff. Hopefully this is a continued conversation as well.
Yeah. And by the way, I must say, I mean, I do think it probably makes sense it definitely makes sense in the guide somewhere. Whether it's in the payment chapter or not, I'm not sure. But that's where you do the action of sending funds or receiving funds, right? So I think my initial feedback way back was not that it was the wrong place. It was probably more that it was one of the first things we saw on the GitHub. So it felt like maybe starting at the wrong end of the chapter. And I know now that's because things were going at from different kind of angles. So I'm probably of the opinion that it does make sense in the payments chapter. I'm not sure where else in the guide it makes more sense. What do you think, Christoph?
Yeah, I'm same thing as you. I feel like it's a sub page.
Yeah.
That's where we just recommend, you should, the wallet should automatically do it. There's no interface, nothing to see here. But then you go in and you can say, well, what's actually happening behind the scenes, and why is this so important, and how does it work, and why, as a designer, should you be able to understand this, and all of these things, and what happens if your wallet can only do feature X but not feature Y, and all that. So it's beyond kind of the introductory stuff and just a pure simple UI level, but it is super important to be aware of and know that it's there and not avoid it or leave it out. And I feel like the more further we go along with the guide, the more of these sub pages we'll have that just dive really deep into specific topics. And maybe that's kind of the real workshop material, where we need those extra tools and we need those sessions to work through things.
Yeah, I mean, your mock-ups and the suggestions are really the golden nuggets here. Like, if someone can come to the guide and say, like, oh, this looks good, I'll just do this, then we're winning. That's what we want, right?
Yeah, the trick with some of these things is, though, that it's kind of easy to put those button, like, to just not show it and say, the wallet, the technology will do it. But then I wish projects worked like that. You can, the reality might not be as simple as that, and that's where we kind of need to. And I'm also curious, there's probably some stuff in there that we really need to back up. And one thing that I'm still not really aware of is, if you look at some of these privacy issues, well, like, how realistic is that to happen to me? What's the real impact of it? Can we quantify that in any way? As a user, if I have an option to choose privacy or low fees, like, what's the price of privacy? Is it €1 per month and I get perfect privacy and it just does all these little things in the background? Or is it more? Or just to, I don't know, to make these more real somehow would be, and then if we can make it really real and show the value of doing all this stuff, then maybe there's a bigger incentive to implement them too.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also at the moment, unfortunately, it's actually the cost benefit or the work benefit can be really steep, right? Like, even for receiving payment in Bitcoin now, like, oh, I should really create 10 different addresses, right? But okay, do I need to set up BTC Pay server? And it goes from, like, oh, I just wanted to get paid, to, like, oh my God, I had to get a degree and buy a tractor. And it's I think there might be spaces in between there that we can occupy with the privacy improvements. Right?
Cool.
That's very cool to directly work closely with wallet, with somebody like the Blue Wallet team, or people who've been in there, and see how we could actually work with them to make some of this stuff happen.
Yeah, wasn't Nuno he shared some Figma drafts on coin selection way back, like 6 months ago or something.
Yep.
I'm not sure if they have implemented it.
I know they had it in a beta some time back. In their Telegram, they update with post updates to their beta versions or development versions.
Yeah.
But I don't know where they are now with it.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna hop off, but thanks again, Ed, and everybody.
Yeah, cool. Me too. Thanks everyone for your ears and feedback, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
But one thing before we log off, Paolo hasn't said a word.
Yeah, I'm just
Just
glad to be back. Just smiling. And yeah, I would like to say that I'm sorry that I disappeared.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah,
No worries.
I had a complicated time with new employer, and but now I'm back.
Good to see you again.
Good to have you back, Paolo.
Nice to
Oh,
be
that's
here.
great.
Nice to be here.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the good thing with open source. You can choose how much you want to be involved and not, and I think it's pretty flexible. Sometimes you have time, and sometimes you don't. All good.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Before we go, I have a question. I understand the coin selection stuff a little bit in terms of how we can improve the transaction cost or the speed, but not really how we can improve the privacy aspect. This is a little bit tricky for me.
I mean, I can give a crack at this. So the first aspect is, I guess, trying to avoid sort of contaminating certain funds with others. So for example, not using maybe certain coins for paying for transactions which maybe you've received from certain, like not crossing over contacts, or if you don't, for example, like maybe don't use the same coins that you pay your, like send money to your ex-girlfriend than you would with your current girlfriend, whatever it is, right? So making sure that different addresses can't get to know different other addresses that you're sort of transacting with. One solution of doing that is like labeling and then avoiding cross-contamination, either yourself by like avoiding those coins or using those coins, or like white labeling or like sort of black labeling or listing certain coins. The other one that I sort of mentioned is, I guess, a more sort of wider, at a wider privacy level, is like minimizing your change outputs. So obviously if, for example, like to give the example, if I'm going to pay you $5 worth of Bitcoin and the only UTXO I have in my wallet is like one Bitcoin, so like that's $60,000 worth, and I use that $60,000 to fund a $5 transaction, there's going to be $59,995 in change, which is then going to go to a new address, which is owned by me. So you now know that I own at least 59,000 whatever dollars. So minimizing change outputs basically reduces the likelihood of exposing too much information about what you own to the person that you sent it to. So those are like a couple of ways that you can minimize privacy loss. But then it also gets kind of confusing because then there's like network level privacy, and like IP addresses, and whether or not you should be like transacting over Tor and things like that. So privacy is like this really deep thing with transactions that you can get into. And I think I was trying to keep it slightly more surface level where people can try and sink their teeth into it a little bit, and also something which is not like totally out of the picture. Like I think everyone can kind of understand, everyone could probably create some sort of like a label or manually select a coin, but they might not be able to like figure out how to use Tor to like route their payments through some sort of remote node, and or like so again, keeping it like, okay, well, how can everyone benefit from this? But then it kind of brings up interesting things about like network level privacy, and can we make that a pretty good like standard for Bitcoin transactions? Yeah, hopefully that answered like a couple of questions. I don't know if Christoph had anything more to add.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just
these examples were very, very helpful.
That's good. For additional reading, check out the link in the chat. The Bitcoin Wiki has a privacy page, and it's super long, and there are tons of examples in there. Some of them are, it's like if you're prosecuted or so in some country that, hopefully you don't have that problem. Maybe there's some ones that are more relatable to your life, your way of living. But yeah, there's a lot there, and just reading through some of them, I feel like allows you to understand where data gets leaked and in which ways, and how as designers we can help prevent that. But yeah, big topic.
Thank you very much. I'll check it out. I sent it to my Kindle, so thanks.
There's so much in that
I
wiki.
I just thought of something, and I didn't finish watching your presentation. My Wi-Fi kind of went off, but I was thinking you make a lot of associations with gold, and some of those things can simplify things for people. I would just, and I don't know if you have that already, but just make sure you tell people that it's different from gold because you can carry it everywhere. It's always a good point to make. Like, what makes it different from gold that's possible.
Yeah, I think it's also good. Like, I kind of want to be. There are lots of things which people trying to relate Bitcoin to gold, whether it's like, trying to create some sort of like financial value for it, whatever. But even like the term mining, right, relates to mining for gold or precious metals. So that's probably like the first way that Bitcoin is maybe like rooted in a gold analogy. Hence the photos of miners as well, which is good to have feedback on that. But the second is also, I use that like the analogy of like melting down gold and then reforging coins. That seems like maybe a good way of, or I have found that a good way of like understanding the fact that UTXOs can kind of be like used or like signed and used and then created anew. But maybe not always the best analogy. And then the third is also that they're like different sizes, right? Like you can have a chunk of gold like this big, or you can have literally like gold dust, right? So it kind of relates to dust. And I was trying to play around with like, what Daniel said about like language, like is coins a good way to use it? And I was like, well, people are probably not going to want to call them nuggets because it's just like, it doesn't sound great, I don't think. But yeah, like you said, probably worth also mentioning like the ways in which Bitcoin is not like gold, because I don't think you want to get like this. You probably don't want to root the analogy too deep, but just make it. I was just trying to make it, I guess, identifiable, or like getting people to kind of understand it in different ways. I mentioned that I've also created like a much longer document, where, or like as like an educational resource, whether that turns into like a page on the Bitcoin Design Guide or something, where it runs through like an example of cash. Like, what would this transaction look like if you use cash? What would it look like if you used a credit card? What would it look like if you used gold? And what would it look like if you used Bitcoin? So in that longer document, I kind of stretch out those analogies and those scenarios, and I kind of say, okay, well, it's different. Bitcoin is different to a credit card because of this reason, or it's different to cash because of this reason. It's closer to gold maybe, but it's still different to gold because of these reasons. So I didn't want to go too deep into a lot of this stuff today, because obviously we had like time limits. But I think if I was hosting like workshops, hopefully these are the things which can kind of be ironed out, and questions can be answered there and then, and conversations can be kind of had. But yeah, it's definitely been like a really interesting process to be like, how can I make this as relatable as possible? Because it's really unrelatable at the best of times for most people. And like, how can you get people to like care about this thing, which is kind of unrelatable at times? So yeah, trying to get a start on it.
So funny. Just today I had I'm working with Bosch on the Bitcoin icon set, and he added there's been a pickaxe, like a crossed shovel and pickaxe for mining in the Figma file, and I so do not want to include it. I do not want a shovel in there, because it's like, come on, we're talking about the future of money. No shovels or pickaxes. I added the one where there's like little miner guy with a helmet. I feel like, okay, that's kind of reasonable. That still feels like something more modern, but the pickaxe, that just gets me. That just feels so wrong.
Yeah, making them more appropriate images, I guess.
But I don't know if it's avoidable. Somebody will add it, or
yeah.
I don't know, whatever makes people imagine things easier,
Mhm.
probably. Even
Cool.
if it's a little strange sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. All right, guys.
Cool.
I'm going to hop off, but yeah, thanks for all the feedback, and feel free to keep the conversation going.
Yep. Thanks for showing everything. I'll have more feedback in Slack.
Cool.
And thanks, everyone.
See you soon.
Bye.